Good afternoon and welcome to the Henry Schein Dental Academy webinar series. My name is Adam, Marketing Specialist, and I will be your moderator. We are excited to welcome Ali Oromchian as our speaker tonight, as he will share how you can protect your practice from discrimination lawsuits. Ali is a renowned employment attorney as well as co-founder of HR for Health. Before we get started, we have a few reminders. At any point during tonight's webinar, we do encourage your participation through the chat and Q&A features. Please type any questions you might have into the Q&A section of your control panel, and we will answer them live at the end of the presentation. Henry Schein is not offering CE credit for viewing or attending this presentation live or on demand. And this webinar is sponsored by Henry Schein's Dental Business Institute, as well as HR for Health. Ali, thanks for being with us tonight. Looking forward to a great presentation.
All right, well, everyone, welcome back. It's great. Thank you, Adam, for the great introduction. And I'm looking forward to this presentation as we kick off 2021. We had 5 good days of 2021, and then, everything broke loose again. But here we are. And we're going to talk about a subject that, of course, is near and dear to my heart on the HR side. But more importantly, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of a lot of important things that a lot of you have been asking about as we lead into this year, because as all these new rules and laws have been changing, there's been a lot of little details that have changed along with it that you may or may not know about. So we're going to go through those in detail today. And we're going to review some of the things that we've talked about in the past, as well as just sort of a refresher coming into 2021, if any of you missed the end of the year webinar that we did in December. We're going to also talk about vaccines. So I know there's a lot of questions about that. If we have time at the end of the day today, we're going to talk a little bit about that as well in terms of answering your questions, but I'm going to go into some detail with you. So as most of you know, HR is all about the small things, and you've heard me say this before, and it bears even more truth this year than maybe even any other year, because of the fact that COVID and the FFCRA, and now with the new PPP, loans that are coming out as well, with the second variation, there's a lot of little details that you need to be aware of as you're planning for the year. And if last year, especially since, the offices opened up again, if is any sort of example of what we're supposed to expect or what we are going to see in 2021, I can tell you it's going to be a very busy year for plaintiffs' lawyers and those who want to use this as an opportunity to maybe try to get some money from you and kind of cause issues, HR issues, to become bigger things than maybe they should be. And so my goal today is to minimize that, right? I want to lower your risk profile. That is my goal today, and really every day that we talk with one another, because if your risk profile is low, the chance of you getting in trouble is going to be minimal compared to where you might be today, which is a higher risk profile. As many of you know, my wife is a pediatric dentist here in the San Francisco Bay Area. This is our new family picture with me actually having a beard. So this is updated, and believe it or not, for those of you who didn't see any of our last webinars, I have a high school kid now, which is kind of crazy to say out loud, but I do. And as we sort of talk about this year, of course, a lot of us are worried about our families. A lot of us are worried about our practices. The vaccine's out. Many of you have already received the vaccine or are in line to get it very soon. So there's some very exciting things happening. But I can tell you that just from my experience, as a lawyer, but also as someone who is married to a dentist, that the stress level amongst the employees, amongst your team, is still very high. And many of them have not gotten the vaccine and don't plan on getting the vaccine. And we're going to talk about that today. But this all is tying into making things on the HR side even more complex than they've ever been before, because we've never had to deal with something like this. Now, I'm going to show this slide again a little bit later, but for those of you who want a special gift from us in Henry Schein, you can get a handbook checklist for 2021. It has a lot of great information in there about things that your employment handbook should have coming into this year, and also a vaccine declaration form that is an important document for you to give to your team members, as we'll talk about in a little bit, when they decide to get the vaccine and they've they've received it and things of that nature. It's good proof to have in your system. So go ahead and text the word HR Schein to 44222, and you should get that in your email box. I'll show it a little bit later today. For those of you that don't know me, I am a dental lawyer. This is all I do. We work nationally on almost all topics relevant to dentists, other than practice, or I should say malpractice cases. We don't do any malpractice cases, but we handle everything else from practice transitions to partnerships to lease renewals, of course, and of course HR. And a few years ago, we created HR for Health because we wanted to, again, lower your risk profile and allow you to thrive in practice. So let's just jump right into it, because these are the topics that are most relevant to you. We're going to start talking about wage and hour. This is one of the riskiest areas of the law right now, because it is the one where there's the most lawsuits that are filed against dentists. This is an area that insurance companies don't insure for, because the lawsuits are so rampant, and we're going to go into detail about that. And this is an area where HR for Health really thrives and can keep you compliant. So for those of you, all of you, and there were so many of you who reached out beforehand, asking for more information and wanting demos and things of that nature, make sure you talk to our team about this so that they can keep you up to date. So we're going to talk about the three most important employment claims that we see out there, wage and hour being at the top of that. We're going to talk about strategies to how to avoid these claims, and then finally your questions. Okay. So when we talk about wage and hour, the top thing usually is lunches and breaks. And how do you provide it? When do you provide it? And a lot of states now have their own rules, of course, with regard to lunches and breaks. And depending on which state you're in, these rules can vary. And so you have to be careful about what resources you look at when you're looking at what you need to abide by in terms of your own state. Now, in many states that follow the federal guidelines, what you need to do is to have at least a minimum of a 30-minute lunch at some point during the day, usually between the 4th and the 6th hours of the day. And that's very important. And many states also have breaks that they institute for their team, for your employees. And so they need to have a morning break and then an afternoon break. And those are paid. Now, whereas lunch is not necessarily paid. So now across the country, these can vary. We've seen 5-minute breaks to 20-minute breaks. But typically, they're somewhere in that 10-minute range. And then more importantly, the lunches are about 30 minutes long. Now, this is very important, and it seems like a basic thing because most of you provide an hour lunch for your team members. But here's the area that I want to talk to you about, because these are the kind of things that can get you in trouble. The key to defeating a case against you regarding unpaid breaks or lunches is to make sure that you have proper tracking of time. Okay, to have proper tracking of time, and that is vital. And so making sure that they're clocking in and they're clocking out of an electronic system is vital. Making sure that they can only clock in themselves, that you're not clocking in for them or clocking out for them, that their team members aren't doing it for them. I think that's very important, of course. But of course, also making sure that your employment manual talks about some of these rules. And so one of the things we always recommend is make sure your employment manual talks about when the lunch break is. Okay, at what point during the week or during the weekday is your lunch? Is it between the 12 and 1, 12:30 and 1:30? Is it 1 to 2? Where does it fall? And for those of you who close your offices for lunch, in other words, patients can't come in, there's no treatment being done, there's not a receptionist, you close the doors. What I always recommend is make sure that in your practice management software that you've blocked off that hour or hour and a half or 30 minutes for lunch that you've got on your schedule. Just block it off on the schedule. That's very important. For those of you who keep your offices open during lunch, meaning you have rotating lunches, some employees take it earlier, some take it a little bit later. Our recommendation to protect yourself is to make sure that when you are looking at the columns in the practice management software, that you've got lunches already preset for different employees in their columns at different times. Of course, ensuring that you're doing, they're taking lunch during the right times of the day, but make sure it's blocked off. right? Make sure it's blocked off. This is a huge secret sauce to how we defend you in court. I can't tell you how many cases we've won by just being able to show the practice management software and the employee claiming that they never got lunch, or they were pulled into a case, or they were pulled into this or that, and we're able to defeat that because of this documentation. So one is making sure you have an employment manual that documents when you are taking lunch or when your employee should be taking lunch, and then making this sure that the schedule reflects that as well. So one question that we get a lot is, well, what if I'm running late, or what if there's an emergency? And so it's important to remember that if you are giving, let's say, an employee an hour lunch, but the law says that you only have to give them a 30-minute lunch, then if you run 15 minutes late on a case, they're still getting 45 minutes of lunch. That's sufficient. Remember, it's a 30-minute minimum. So if just because you scheduled an hour doesn't mean that they are, that you violated something if they don't get an hour every single day. As long as they get the minimum, you should be okay. And that's a very important to remember as we go through this rule. And if you have any questions about it, please let us know. The next area of wage and hour is overtime. Now, overtime is, varies across the state, across the country. Some states, a handful of states, have what's called a dual overtime rule, which means that you have to pay overtime if you go over 40 hours in a week or 8 hours in any given day. Most states have the 40-hour rule only, which means that you owe overtime to your employees if they go over 40 hours in the week. And in many dental practices that are open 4 days a week, the employees are not going into that 40 hours, so it may or may not become an issue. But it's important to know what those rules are, right? What those rules are. States like California and Colorado have their own rules, whereas other states, follow the federal guideline like Texas. And so you just have to know what those rules are and then keep abreast of them and make sure you're paying your employees overtime. Now, we have a lot of doctors who say, look, I didn't approve the overtime, so do I have to pay it? And the answer is absolutely, absolutely. Regardless of whether you approved overtime or not, you still have to pay it if the employee goes into overtime. Now, you can write them up for violating your overtime policy, but because maybe they went into overtime without asking you first, or maybe they're consistently going into overtime when they shouldn't be, but you still have to pay them for that, okay? Now, in terms of the federal and state guidelines and the regulations, just remember, it's important to look at your state's rules and make sure you're absolutely familiar with it. If you have any questions about that, contact our HR for Health team. We'll give you everything you need to keep in mind with regard to that. Now, it's not always so easy. There are some things that you may not think in terms of overtime, and you may still owe overtime. So let me go through some of these. And these are the common pitfalls. If you're paying per diem to your hygienists, if you're a general dental practice, then please be careful, because in those situations, you most certainly will still have to pay overtime to your hygienist. This applies to really anybody in the office that you're giving a per diem, like $400 a day or another number, as opposed to paying them hourly. So if you are paying a hygienist $400 a day or per diem, then make sure you're also paying them overtime. There are some ways of getting around that, and our team can talk to you about it, but it's not things that we necessarily recommend. Like, for example, putting a hygienist on a salary and things of that nature. They're solutions, but not necessarily always optimal in a dental practice. And so, I get a lot of calls where dentists will ask me, well, I really want to just avoid paying overtime. I'm going to make everyone a salary. Well, that makes sense, except that, in many scenarios, paying somebody a salary also restricts you. If your afternoon schedule blows up or patient schedule, something happens and those employees aren't, they don't have patients, and maybe you send them home, you still have to pay them that salary. There's a lot of little things like that putting somebody on salary doesn't always make sense. Of course, if you've got a office manager, you want to put them on salary. If you've got a doctor, you may want to put them on salary. But the per diem is a typical pitfall where it's so normal to pay a hygienist a daily rate, but then the other side of it, not paying overtime will cause you some problems. We see this a lot. We see this a lot. The other thing is called weighted averages, and weighted averages is something, it's sort of a dirty secret, if you will, in the HR world, and very few HR companies will talk about this with you, and they kind of sweep it under the rugs because they don't know how to handle it. They don't have a good system for handling it. We worked for years to figure out our algorithm in our software so we could actually do this calculation for you. So why is it a dirty secret? Well, the weighted average is when you have an employee that may work in two different offices, for example, at two different rates of pay, or maybe they have two different jobs for you. Maybe they do your social media and they're also your RDA, or maybe they do, they're part of the time they're your, front receptionist, and then they float in the back and they're also, a DA. In those situations, you may be paying them differently. And so in order to calculate overtime properly and calculate their pay properly, you have to do some very sophisticated calculations called weighted average. And nobody really wants to touch it because it is complex and it can be tricky. Lucky for you, HR for Health does all of that automatically for you. And so we've got that figured out. And so keep that in mind, because again, this is another pitfall that we see very often. Okay. Now, the final thing in terms of pitfalls when it comes to overtime is how you pay discretionary bonuses versus non-discretionary bonuses. Okay. Now, let me define to you what a discretionary bonus is. A discretionary bonus is a bonus that you give to someone out of the blue, out of the goodness of your heart, maybe because of something they've done. There's no expectation of them receiving it. There's no expectation of the amount. They don't know any of the details. You just give it to them. When you give a bonus like that as a thank you, that is not, that doesn't need to be counted towards the overtime calculation. But if you give a bonus to somebody that is non-discretionary, what that means is that they know the amount, they know how to get it, they know when you'll give it, they know all the details about it, that then needs to be calculated into their compensation when calculating overtime. Right? And that can make a very big difference, right? Because if you're giving somebody, let's say, a couple $100 a pay period or a month because they've hit certain goals and things of that nature, that can absolutely increase their comp, which impacts how much overtime they get. Okay, so again, really important that that you get the timekeeping done correctly here. The HR for Health timekeeping service is second to none when it comes to how it manages that, how it relates to your benefits and all of these other rules. And so make sure you take a look at it, because it really is the secret sauce for HR compliance. Okay. Now, Adam, we've got a question that we wanted to ask everyone. And the question is, how do you currently track your overtime, right? And we've got some options. You could calculate it manually, with paper and pen and a calculator. Do you use an Excel spreadsheet? Do you use an electronic time clock? Do you use your payroll company? And then finally, I don't pay overtime. These are all anonymous, so don't worry. You're not admitting to some sort of guilt, and no one's going to come take you to jail by answering these questions. But if you all don't mind, take a moment to answer them. And the reason we ask these questions is because this starts to get us thinking about something we're going to do at the end of today, which is really come up with an action plan, a real game plan for making sure that you're compliant after today. Adam mentioned about the Dental Business Institute. One of the things that I enjoyed most about teaching that class in Milwaukee was because it was all hands-on. It was all hands-on, and we were actually doing the work and making sure you were compliant when you left and went home. And so that's the exciting part. So Adam, do we have any votes in yet? Do we have any results?
Yep, it's looking like slightly over 50% use the electronic time clock, and roughly 15% do not pay overtime.
Okay, excellent. Okay, all right. So we're going to fix that. By the time we're done today, we're going to fix that. Now, for those of you that are using an electronic time clock, I'm really proud of you. Hopefully you're using something like Dentrix or HR for Health. But again, remember, you want your time clock to match up really well with benefits and things of that nature, which HR for Health can provide. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. For those of you who have had any trouble with your time clock system or transferring the information to payroll, let us know. We'll walk you through that. All right, so let's talk about the next area that we see a lot of issues on, is this whole concept of independent contractor versus employee. And this has been something that has been debated for years and years and years, which is, when I hire my team, do I hire them as an employees or do I hire them as independent contractors? And I'm gonna break this conversation up slightly. Because there's two groups in your office, most likely. You probably have your regular team members, your hygienist, your RDA, your DA, your front receptionist, office manager, and then you've got your doctor employees, associates, if you have associates working for you. So with the team, the auxiliaries, right, the hygienists, the RDAs, and the DAs, you can never hire them as an independent contractor. And there's almost no chance under any state guidelines, under any federal guidelines, where any of those people would ever qualify as an independent contractor. Okay, and so if you have any of those people, a hygienist, an office manager, any of those folks as an independent contractor, please contact us immediately so we can help you fix that, because that is a huge, huge red flag. And will cause you problems on so many different levels, okay? On so many different levels. There's almost no chance that they qualify for that. And when I say no chance, I mean like a 0.0001 chance that they would qualify as an independent contractor. As an associate, if you have any associates, you might be able to get away with that. Now, it's become a lot harder, right? It's become a lot harder to hire your associates as independent contractors. And with some new federal rules that went into effect on January 1, they've made it even more difficult. It used to be that just some states like, California, New York, Michigan had very strict rules regarding this. But this, the federal government has sort of taken the California's lead on this, and sort of tightened up their rules. And so right now, it would be really hard for a doctor associate to be classified as an independent contractor unless truly they are independent. And what the IRS looks at about 21 different, criteria, but there's really only one that is the most important. I mean, you won't hear them say this, but it really always comes down to one thing, which is control. Who has control over the employees, over the patients, over the doctor, who, the associate, over the supplies, over the treatment plan, over all of those things? Who's got control over those? So if this doctor associate is working on your patients or the practice's patients, then you have control over those patients. If they're working with your team, the practice's team, then you have control over the team. If they're using your supplies, your equipment, your dental chairs, if they're using all those things, then you have control. Now you might say, well, yeah, but they do their own treatment plan. Yes, they do. They use their own independent judgment as a clinician. I get that, but that's not enough, right? That's not enough. Everything else points towards them being an employee. So there's a little bit of a balancing act here. I know many of you like hiring your doctor's associates as independent contractors because it's great for you financially and tax-wise. It's great for the associate as well. They get to write off things that they would never be able to write off. It's great for everybody except the IRS, which is why the Department of Labor's new rules that they have implemented and are going to be effective in March of this year make it very clear that it's now, that they should be hired as employees. And they look at things like the nature of the work and things of that nature that we just talked about. So just be very careful about it. For many of you, if you already have independent contractors, talk to your CPA about whether you should change them to employee or keep them as that. If you're going to hire any new doctor associates, please hire them as an employee. It's just not worth the risk anymore. Next, let's talk about exempt and non-exempt. And this is sort of an offshoot of that. And here, it's a little bit more common to have some of your team members maybe be exempt versus non-exempt. And so let's talk about that. So an exempt employee, as it might sound, is someone who's exempt from receiving overtime, from maybe giving lunches and breaks and whatnot. They're exempt from those normal rules. And so who qualifies as an exempt employee? Well, doctor associates might qualify as exempt. Office managers might qualify as exempt. Some managers in your office may qualify. So what do I mean? Not just an office manager, of course, because I just said that they may qualify, but a back office manager or supervisor might qualify. A front office supervisor or manager might qualify. So those are roles that may qualify. But you will never have a DA, an RDA, a hygienist, qualify as exempt, unless they, they would almost never qualify as exempt. Now, the one caveat to that is that if you want them to qualify, like if you want a hygienist to qualify, an office manager to qualify as exempt, what you have to do is they have to fit a certain profile. Okay, and what that means is that they must be paid a salary. And it can be a yearly salary, it can be a monthly salary, it can be a weekly salary. Okay, it cannot be per diem, and it cannot be hourly. Okay, that's really important. Right, it cannot be they cannot be paid hourly, and they cannot be paid per diem. They have to be paid a salary, weekly, monthly, or yearly. Okay, and that's usually game over for a lot of people in terms of hiring their hygienist as a salaried employee, because it just doesn't always make sense to do that. An office manager, usually, if you have a true office manager, then who can hire and fire, manages at least 3 people, and things of that nature, and then their primary duty is to be an office manager, that person you should be paying a salary to, if you want them to be exempt. Okay, if you want them to be exempt. And the same thing, by the way, applies to your doctor associates. If you want your doctor associates not to earn overtime, not to necessarily worry about their lunches and the breaks or whatnot, you also have to pay them a salary as well. And there's ways that we can kind of work on that and talk to you about it. So if any of you have associates and you want to kind of go down that road, let us know, and we can help you craft that. All right, let's move on from wage and hour to wrongful termination. And wrongful termination, as it sounds, is when someone claims that they were wrongfully terminated for one reason or another. And this is becoming really rampant right now because of COVID, right? Because everyone's using COVID as a reason to take time off, to do different things. And so sometimes it's causing a lot of frustration in the office, and then employees are being fired. So we're going to talk about that and how to avoid it. But first, I want to talk about when to never fire someone. And these are things if you've heard me speak over the years, you've heard me say this. It's sort of what I'm known for, but I always do it because, quite honestly, it is true. You never want to fire someone who fits into one of these categories. If they're pregnant, okay, never fire them. If they're older, right, never fire them. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then if they've been injured on the job or sometimes even off the job, you never want to fire them. Now, I put those in quotation in terms of never, because never say never, right? There may be situations where you have to fire that pregnant employee, or you have to fire that older employee, or whatnot. And what I would tell you is never do that by yourself, right? As a Henry Schein customer, as someone who's part of that family, you have access to me, and you have access to the entire HR for Health family. So reach out to us and let us consult with you on your, before you do that. Even if you're not a customer, we will walk you through that and help you, because that's what we do. And hopefully, we'll earn your business at that point. But the reality is that you never want to fire these people without talking to a professional, right? You are just absolutely setting yourself up for a lawsuit, especially if they're pregnant, right? Especially if they're pregnant, because that is like the typical situation where, you've been thinking about firing someone for a while, you haven't done it, you didn't want to do it, you didn't want that conflict, and then they come out and they say, hey, I'm pregnant, and now you're kind of stuck with them for the next 18 months. And so you just have to be careful. And you might say, well, Ali, why 18 months? Well, you got 9 months of, incubation, right? And then, 3 to 4 months where they're on medical leave because they've delivered the baby. And then after that, you can't fire them on their first day back. You have to wait at least 6 months. And so, at least to pretend, and then you fire them. And so that takes you to 18 months. And now some states, believe it or not, that's even longer. In California, they've extended that rule for some of the businesses. And so it could be almost 2 years before you can fire someone, because now someone's job's protected, if they have a child or they're taking care of a child. And so really kind of crazy things. So pregnancy, be very careful. If they're older, what does that mean? Well, The technical rule across the country is 40 years or older. Now that is a crazy rule. I know. I'm sure a lot of you just gasped on the phone, just or on the webinar, and it's crazy. 40 years, it's nuts. So my recommendation is always 50 or above, approaching 60. Right? That's really where it becomes risky. I don't think a lawyer with a straight face can say that a 42-year-old has been discriminated for age discrimination when they're fine and capable of doing whatever it is that they need to do. But if they're above 50 and they're approaching 60, that's when it starts to become a little bit risky. The closer they get to 60, the more risk it is for you. So just be careful of that. Make sure you reach out to us if you do. And then finally, if they've been injured on the job or off the job, those can definitely be considered disabilities, and it could be protected disabilities. And so you just want to be careful about that. Just reach out to us at that point, and we can talk to you about it. Now, what are the solutions? How do you minimize your liability? How do you lower your risk profile when you're doing this? Well, there's a couple ways. One is you want really good job descriptions, right? We want really good job descriptions. Now, I don't know about you guys. If any of you have ever tried to create a job description, it sounds easy, but it's really tough, right? It's really, really tough because to put down on paper what each position in your office does on a day-to-day basis, like the major things that they do, takes time. And when you do it, you don't even feel like you're getting it all because they do so much. So fortunately, we have done all of that hard work for you. We have really detailed job descriptions that have anything and anything you could imagine for every position in a dental practice, any specialty practice. We have all of that. If you need to remove things from it, it's much easier to remove things from a job description than add to it. So we've made it comprehensive so that you guys can review and say, oh no, my receptionist doesn't do this, this, and this. And then you can take those things off if you want. All right, so great, really, really helpful. The other thing is you really want to think about the accommodation process. And we're going to talk about that again. We're going to talk about that with COVID. But I want to sort of lay the foundation for you because the accommodation process or the interactive process, if you will, of talking to employees as they're, when they fit into these risky profiles is really important to minimize your risk. And sometimes it really helps resolve the issue even before it gets to be too litigious. And the reason is because you're talking to the employees, you're figuring out what they need, you're talking about their wants, you're talking about their desires, you're figuring out, does she really want to be out because of this disability, or does she feel like she couldn't do a great job and so she wants some time off to do that, but she doesn't know any other way of doing it? Does this employee who's pregnant, is she really going to stop early, or is she going to power through and work until close to her delivery? Those things, those misunderstandings that occur without having these discussions are a lot of times the primary root of a lot of lawsuits. And so just having these discussions, these open discussions, really, really helps to put things in order and to allow you to accommodate. Now, you never have to accommodate to a degree that puts the business in jeopardy or puts you in sort of into a position where you have to hire somebody else or you have to terminate somebody to accommodate. You never have to do that. But easy steps that are possible are things that you are obligated to do. Now, we've got another question, Adam, which is, have you had an employee go out on pregnancy or disability leave before? Now, most of you who have been in practice for a while, I'm sure have had to deal with this, and it probably was not the best situation. I'll tell you a personal story. My wife, in my wife's practice a few years ago, she had 3 people go out on maternity leave at the same time. And I'm sure there are horror stories like that for many of you. And you know how it is out there. There's 100% employment in dentistry. It's really hard to find people to work. And so when you have 3 members go out on pregnancy leave at the same time, it could be pretty challenging to find replacements and to do with them. So I raised this question because most of you will probably answer yes. Adam, do we have any results yet?
Yep, about 70% said yes.
All right, 70% of you said yes. And so, which is great. Yeah. And most of you will have that in your careers. I mean, at some point, this is going to occur. But the reason I'm asking this question is because I want you to start thinking and imagining how you handled that, right? You know, what did you feel? How did your insides feel when that person told you about it? Or how did you handle it when you went home? And the reason I bring this up is because that stress that you might have felt, you know, of course, we're all happy for our team members when they're pregnant because, you know, it's an exciting time for them, especially if it's their first child. But at the end of the day, you know, you go from that human connection to suddenly the business thoughts, and the business thoughts are like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And then you start to feel that tightness, right? And you start to feel that stress. And the, you know, that feeling is a feeling that I want you to know we can help you kind of get rid of, right? That feeling of stress, that internal stress that you feel, is not because you're unhappy for them. It's not because you think your business is going to go under. It's none of those things. What it is the unknown. It's the unknown of, what do I do next? How do I manage this? How do I manage them? How do I get, you know, through this period of time, you know, well, without increasing my risk? And that's really what we're here to do, is to show you how to do that so that you don't feel that, and you can just power on and go to the next day without that stress, right? And part of this comes down to documentation, right? It comes down to documentation. And when we talk about PPPs, when we talk about the FFCRA, which we'll do in a second, documentation is king. I mean, it is absolutely king. I mean, if you've ever heard me speak before, you know I used to say that documentation is your get out of jail free card, because if you've got really good documentation, the chance of a really bad, you know, lawsuit, or one that really kind of, you know, can be crippling, is a lot lower. Well, that is even more true right now, because with the FFCRA and with the PPP loans, the government is coming and is going to be doing audits, and they're going to be checking your records for compliance, because you're using those, right? You're claiming certain things with regard to your payroll when you're applying for forgiveness on your PPEs. You need data for that. When you're doing your FFCRA, you know, and you want your reimbursements from a tax perspective from the IRS or whatnot, you need documentation. And so it's important to keep in mind that there's been a big chunk of money set aside with each of those laws for compliance, because they want to root out fraud. And of course, I know you're not doing fraud, but what's happening is that if you don't have good documentation, that's what they're going to interpret it as, right? They're going to like, well, did this person really go on FFCRA leave, or are you just kind of manipulating it, right? And so it's really vital that you get you get that. And here, when we talk about documentation, we're talking about performance reviews, right? Violation tracking, you know, development plans. You know, it's really important to get that all documented. I cannot tell you how many times we have really great doctors who go through these processes. They create really good team members. They're really patient, but they kind of put themselves in the corner because they really haven't documented stuff. And if you don't document it, it's as if it didn't exist. You know, I remember early in my career, I used to do some practice management seminars on, you know, how to chart properly in your patient charts, and what to write and what not to write. And if you guys remember those old days, we used to say, don't ever skip a line, right? You know, don't skip a line between entries, because, you know, a jury, you know, or an attorney on the other side will try to convince the jury that you left that line so that you could write in more treatment, you know, that you may have missed. Well, the same thing is true here, right? You know, you don't have documentation for your HR. That's it, right? That's it. You know, they're going to claim like that didn't happen. So it's important to get documentation. It's important for them to sign it, especially for violations, right? I mean, and I'm not saying, you know, write up, you know, the first time they're tardy, or the first time your tray is not ready for your patient. I'm not saying write them up, you know, and ask for their signature, but you should write them up unofficially in HR for Health, so that you have record of it. And then if it happens a second or third time and they're not learning, then you ask for their signature so that they see how serious it really is. And of course, you want to do performance reviews. We do recommend that you do it on the anniversary of their employment, not at Christmas time, during the holidays. That's probably the worst time of the year to do performance reviews. Do it on the anniversary of their employment, and make sure you go into that performance review with objective data, right? Pull data. If you're an HR for Health customer right now, go and pull their tardy reports, go pull their task report, see what they've done, right? See how strong of an employee they are. So that way, when you reward them, you can base it on facts as opposed to emotion, right? And when you base it on facts as opposed to sort of subjectiveness, the employee will appreciate that more, because they'll realize, that you understand how strong of an employee they are and what they've contributed to the practice. When we did a survey through the Dental Business Institute years ago, we found that most employees don't think their doctors are prepared for their performance reviews. They don't think they even know what they're doing, or how and what they've done to contribute. So when you think about all those things, just remember, go in with objective data. Tell them, that data. Talk to them about it so that they feel good. And HR for Health has all of that for you. And of course, development plans. If there's an area that the employees need to improve on, then this is a good thing to create for them. All right. Now let's talk about another sort of strategy for if you have to lay off people. We know that this was really hot back in March and April, and I'm proud to say that we were the only HR company in the industry in dental that recommended that you not fire your team members, that you furlough them. There were some that recommended that you fire everybody, and I can tell you those did not work out so well for many of those practices. The loyalty that got burned there with the employees was really bad, and a lot of team members didn't come back, or they had a different relationship with their doctors when they did. In some situations it worked out, but I'm proud to say that, and the reason is because we all need our teams. We all need our team members to do what we do every day. Without them, we really are not capable of running a practice and being efficient and whatnot. So if God forbid you're in a situation where you have to lay off employees, meaning more than one, the way I want you to do it is to find an objective methodology for terminating those employees. And so let me tell you what the easiest ones are. And yours, it may not fit this because of the way your office is set up, but these are the ways to do it. If you can, for example, lay off the higher paid employees, that's one objective way. You could also lay off the last to be hired, right? Last in, first out rule that exists. So you're not letting go of any one person for any other reason than you were the last couple to be hired. So I have to let you guys go and keep the employees that have been with me the longest. Those things are the kinds of things that are objective and not subjective, right? If you start firing people randomly, then the chance of there being sort of discrimination type claims is very high. Is very high. So again, if you ever looking to hire anybody in a couple of people at a time because of business or something of that nature has occurred, give us a call. We'll walk you through it. We'd be happy to do it, on a complimentary basis, because we know how stressful of a situation it is, right? So don't hold back on that at all. Okay. All right. Let's go to what's becoming really relevant right now, which is retaliation. So what does retaliation really mean? Well, retaliation is when you perform some sort of negative action against the employee, whether you terminate them, cut their hours, cut their pay, move them to a different office, do different things in response to something that they have done, right? Or something that they have asked for. So how does this occur these days? Well, retaliation right now is very common with regard to FFCRA, right? It's absolutely the most common thing. So someone, in other words, asks for leave under FFCRA, and then because they asked for leave, you turn around and fire them, change their pay, change their job description, so on and so forth. That is considered retaliation, and you got to be really careful about it. Now, you might say that, look, it didn't have anything to do with that. It just happened to be close in proximity. And I have to tell you that temporal proximity, even though the law says it should be ignored, right? Even though it says it should be ignored, juries and judges do not ignore it, right? It's human nature to say if A or if B happens after A, that B occurred because of A, right? I mean, it's, even though it may not be logical in many situations, that's how juries and judges think. And so I want you to think about that as you're sort of thinking about what you're doing in terms of FFCRA. And so just kind of keep that in mind. There are some exemptions, for FFCRA in some states. In some states that has been sort of abolished, even though that exemption seems to have held up. And so California, for example, got rid of the exemption. They said that no one is really exempt from that rule. And so as far as the dental practice is concerned, in some states, that exemption for doctors and their team members does exist. So again, I'm not going to go into really great detail about this right now, only because it's so different state to state right now. But if you have any questions about whether you're exempt or not, reach out to our team, and we will let you know what the situation is there. Now, for 2021, from January 1st to March 31st, the FFCRA is now optional, right? So before January 1, it wasn't optional. Through December 31st, somebody, if they qualified under one of the rules for leave, whether it's emergency sick leave or emergency paid family leave, they were obligated to get it. Now it's optional, but it's really important that you stay consistent. So what I mean by that is, make sure that if you decide to provide FFCRA and leave and pay your employees because they got COVID or their family member got COVID or a child is out of school, any of those 6 reasons, that you do it for all your employees, okay? That you do it for all your employees. Don't just do it for some and not others. Make sure you're consistent with it, because that's where the problems are going to start, okay? And definitely do not fire them, change their job description, do any of those things if they're requesting the leave. Even if you think they're not entitled to it, don't change those other things, because it's going to be considered retaliation. Okay. Now, one thing that we're not seeing a lot of, unless you're an HR for Health customer, is it's important that they qualify, as I mentioned, under one of those reasons. So it's the request form. They need to have a request form filled out that details that. Remember, this is part of the documentation that we were talking about earlier. Now, if you're an HR for Health customer, that request form is on the site. You've got access to it. Please make sure your employees fill that out. If you're not an HR for Health customer, we can get it for you, but just make sure you reach out to our team. But it's really important that they fill that form out, right? That is your golden ticket if the IRS or the federal government comes asking and auditing you, and they will, right? They will. They're going to come and they're going to audit various businesses around the country, because they have the money to, and they want to root out any potential fraud. Another area for retaliation that we're seeing a lot of these days is obviously safety and OSHA reasons related to COVID. This has always been the case, but it hasn't really been an issue. But now, with regard to COVID, there's a lot of stress regarding OSHA guidelines. And so what our recommendations are, make sure that you're following all of the OSHA regulations and safety regulations. Now, there's obviously the federal OSHA regs, and then some states have their own OSHA entities. So make sure you follow both. Whichever one's stricter in different areas, make sure you follow that, because that's what is relevant to you. And again, of course, do not retaliate if somebody asks questions. If we've had a lot of questions from our doctors that say, look, my employees are challenging me. They're saying I'm not doing enough for them. I'm not protecting them enough. But I've got a not a sterilized, but I've got a fan. I've got this air purifier. I've got N95 masks for everybody. I've got shields. I've got everything I could potentially have, and they still think it's not enough. And so just remember, sometimes it's it may feel like it's not enough for them. And so we can coach you through this, but really it comes down to education. You may have to spend some time talking to your team and really getting at the root of their problem. Why do they feel like it's not safe, right? What is it about it that they feel it doesn't work? What else do they think you should do? Having those conversations, maybe even one-on-one, can really help mitigate some of those risks, because sometimes there's just a lack of understanding, right? There's just a lack of understanding of what you're doing to help them, or maybe they don't appreciate and understand how much you've done to make the office safe. And so sometimes just having those discussions helps a lot. But remember, patient and employee screenings, PPEs, social distancing, cleansing procedures, plexiglass dividers, those are all very common, and most of you, if not all of you, have those already. All right. So again, if any issues with safety or OSHA come up, please make sure you don't retaliate against them. Finally, as we kind of get into the next phase before we get to your questions, is requesting accommodations. If an employee is requesting an accommodation because of the vaccine or whatnot, it's important to just have this discussion with them. And so you might say, well, Ali, how does this work? How do I accommodate them? Well, when it comes to this accommodation, what we're really talking about is whether or not you're going to require them to get the vaccine. Now, the rules are that you can require your team members to get the vaccine. So that can be a requirement that you put in place in your office. But there are two exemptions that the employee can use to not get the vaccine and get around your requirements. So one is if they have a disability, right? So if they have some sort of disability that would that doesn't allow them to receive the vaccine, then that is a valid exemption. Okay, that's a valid exemption. The other one is religion, right? If your employee has some sort of religious belief against vaccinations, you have to honor those beliefs with reasonable accommodations, unless it's going to create undue hardships for you. So what does it mean to accommodate, right? What does it mean to accommodate? And so what it means to accommodate is that you got to follow some sort of interactive process with them and talk to them about, figure out why they don't want to get the vaccine. Is it because of a disability, or is it because of a religious reason? And then figure out how that accommodation can happen, right? Is there anything that you're not doing that you would have to do to help them accommodate working in your office while not being vaccinated? And you don't have to go to an extreme where it would create undue hardship, but undue hardship is a pretty high standard. It can't just be inconvenient, right? So if you've got KN95 masks, for example, and the employee's uncomfortable with it, and they have an exemption and they need a N95 mask, and let's say it's much more expensive, that's not an undue hardship, right? That's just an inconvenience. You'd have to get them that. Undue hardship would be, for example, having to close the office completely, or having to fire somebody to accommodate this other employee, or having to hire somebody to accommodate for that employee. Those would be sort of undue hardship type things. And so that's important. That's important for all of you to remember. And also, you got to think about, is there a business necessity for this employee to be working in their position, and how can you justify them continuing to work in the office? Now, one question we get very frequently is, what if they don't have a disability? What if they don't have a religious exemption and they just don't want to get the vaccine? It's a personal decision. They just don't want to get the vaccine. And that, it becomes very difficult, because if they don't fall into any of the exemptions and they just have a personal preference not to get the vaccine, then you have some hard decisions to make. Because one, you could either stick with them and just have them, and let's say you can't accommodate them for whatever reason to come in, or you don't want to necessarily maybe accommodate them because it's not an exemption, you don't have to. You could have them stay home until they feel comfortable coming, or until they get vaccinated, or you could terminate them at that point. Of course, I don't recommend terminating them, but if someone has a personal reason and they just don't want to come in, or they don't want to get vaccinated, and they don't fall under any of the exemptions, that is a possibility, right? That is a possibility for you. So just kind of keep that in mind. Again, don't fire anybody until you talk to one of our team members. But whatever you do, whatever documentation you get for these exemptions, disability or otherwise, make sure you put them somewhere safe under lock and key. It can't be in the same folder as the personnel records. It's got to be a separate record because it's health based. So keep those things in mind. But these kind of accommodations are happening a lot, and they are high risk because of the vaccinations. We saw a stat recently that said that in one county, here in California, they had about 89% of the dentists got vaccinated, and only 27% or 28% of the rest of the team got vaccinated. So there seems to be a little bit of an imbalance between who's getting vaccinated versus not, and some of it might be education based, some of it might be just a lack of understanding. So we don't know, but just kind of keep that in mind. This is going to be a hot topic for the next little while. All right, one final question as we move on. Are you planning to require COVID vaccines for employees in your practice? Yes, no, or unsure? With everything we've talked about today, this is a vital question, and there's a lot of there's a lot of reasons why people are wanting to require the vaccine. Now, one thing while we wait for the results that I want to mention to you all before we end today is that just because you get the vaccine or your team gets the vaccine, it does not mean that these safety protocols are you can put away. You still need the plexiglass, you still need the PPEs, you still need all of those things that you've been doing to keep the office safe, and you may need that for the foreseeable future, well into 2022 and longer, until we get rid of the disease forever. The reality is that just because you have the vaccine doesn't mean you're not a carrier, and so as a result of that, this is not the time to stop with all those health and safety protocols. Adam, any results from that?
Yep, about 70% say they are not going to require it, but they will recommend it.
Okay, excellent, very good. Yeah, that's I think that's very reasonable, considering especially what I just mentioned about the fact that a lot of those PPEs that you're going to have to continue using, especially these safety protocols, are not going to change. We're seeing a lot of that. So here we are at the end of today. As we kind of got through this final material, the moment of truth really is right now. And the reason this is the moment of truth is because you spent this afternoon with me, or this evening, for some of you on the East Coast. And the question is, what are you going to do next, right? What are you going to do next? We've got a very busy year coming, right? Tomorrow is the inauguration, and then there's going to be a whole slew of things after that, potentially, that are going to come out with this new administration. Good or bad, who knows? But we know there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to be happening. And so you're going to get busy. And so the question is, what are you going to do next, right? What are you going to do with all this information? And the reason I say this is because if you're anything like me, you're going to take this information and you're going to ponder about it. You're going to think about it tonight. You're going to speak to your spouse about it. You might have a couple of drinks, when you think back about some of the things I've talked about. But what are you going to do the next day? What are you going to do tomorrow and the day after that? And so I've made this easy for you. What I'd like you all to do is, either on a piece of paper or on your phones or on your computer, if you're there, write down one thing you're going to do from something that you've learned today in the next 7 days. Just in the next 7 days, one thing that you've learned. It might be something as easy as, I'm going to call HR for Health and get the new hire forms because I don't have 12 or 17 of them. Or I'm going to get my employment manual. And then I want you to write one more thing you're going to do in the next 14 days, right? In the next 14 days, I'm going to get my free audit from HR for Health so that they can tell me how I'm doing. Am I HR compliant? Am I not? Do I have a high risk profile? Do I have a low risk profile? And then finally, one last thing that you've learned tonight to do in the next 21 days. So by the beginning of February, if you follow this, you'll have done 3 major things to help you become HR compliant. And as you know, once you get the ball rolling and you start to get into the habit of just kind of doing some of these things, it starts to become a lot easier. And our team is here to help you. So once you start the process, we walk you through everything, and we make sure you get your employment manual. We get you signed up. We get you, HR compliant and to give you that peace of mind. And Adam, I don't know if you heard, but we've got some exciting news that we actually only told our current customers, but I will share with everyone right now, which is that, as many of you know, with our HR software, we also have payroll. But one thing we've done very recently is we've negotiated with a big 401k carrier, and now we are getting rates from them that are the lowest in the country. And so for those of you who don't have 401k for your employees, or you may be in a 401k plan that you're paying a lot, when you become an HR for Health customer, we are passing on all those savings to you. So you'll be able to save a ton on your 401k as well, which makes really a lot of the employees happy. So I'm excited to share that with you. It's the first time we've said it publicly, but that's coming very, very soon. And it's something that we think is going to really elevate even more how the employees feel about their offices and the benefits and whatnot that are being provided at a fraction of the cost that most of advisors are charging now. So we're super excited about that. Again, for those of you who weren't here in the beginning, if you want the handbook checklist for 2021, or you want the vaccine declaration form, please please send a text to that phone number 44222. Just put in one word, HR Schein, to 44222, and you'll get it in your email box as soon as you reply. And so that's all I have. If you guys are interested in HR for Health, please go to this website, and we will take great care of you. You'll get a ton of promotions and things that they have created for Henry Schein. So as a Henry Schein customer, these are perks just for you. And that's all. So.
Great, thank you. Awesome news on the HR for Health front. Congrats on that. We are a little short on time, but I want to fire through a few questions quickly. What if you have a staff member who says they don't want a lunch break and are okay with that because they don't want to clock out and not get paid?
Yeah, great question. So if you've got a team member that is telling you that, they are setting you up for trouble in the future. It doesn't matter whether or not they want it or they don't, whether they're trying to be generous or not. They have to be paid, or they have to take their lunch, and it's unpaid. So make sure that you follow those guidelines. If they work and you're not paying them, they are absolutely setting you up for trouble in the future. And we're talking 5 digits, like mid 5 digits trouble. So it's not a game you want to play. And based on my experience working with thousands and thousands of dentists and dealing with hundreds and hundreds of lawsuits, I can tell you it is almost every time the case. When they say that, it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but within the next 3 to 4 years, it's going to be trouble. So please do not fall into that trap.
If you are not happy with a certain staff member's performance and you've sat down with them and had a performance review with them and see that they have not improved in the areas you've discussed, can you fire them, and can they collect unemployment? Or can you choose to decrease their hourly rate because they're not improving their performance?
Yes, so you can fire them in that scenario, and you can reduce their hourly rate. My recommendation would be, if they're really that bad of an employee and you've tried hard, with performance reviews and other things to make them better, and it just hasn't worked, why would decreasing their hourly rate help them, work better? It probably won't. In fact, it'll probably make it worse. So my recommendation always is, it's better to terminate than to reduce someone's compensation, because they'll be so upset or so disappointed or so demoralized that they might cause even more damage to your practice. And remember, damage to the practice could be something as simple as, not speaking nicely to a patient, who then takes that to, one of these online review places like Yelp or Google reviews and post something negative about you. And then your reputation starts to kind of be diminished. So if they're really not that great of an employee, just get rid of them and try to find someone new. You've tried your best. You've done your earnest to make that work out. Of course, there's a big caveat. If they're pregnant, old, or disabled, don't do anything.
What if an employee refuses to provide any documentation for their absence and are gone for over a month, claiming they were out with COVID? And then what if they also ask for payment after termination?
Yeah, well, so that's a little bit of a loaded question. I mean, they need to give you documentation that they were out, why they were out. If they just say I was out for COVID and they're not giving you any documentation, that doesn't hold up. You can ask for test results. They don't have to give it to you, but they can get a doctor's note saying that they can't come to work and things of that nature, and that's sufficient. So, it sounds like to me that situation is one where the employee is trying to take advantage of you and using COVID as an excuse to either take time off or try to, working some other office and seeing if they like that other office better. In terms of, being paid after termination, I may need more information about that.
Great. And we'll save this one as our last one here. What if you have an ex-employee write a bad false review online? They're already gone. So what can you do about that?
So if you had an ex-employee write something about you that is false, you have a couple of things you can do. One is the top thing is go on the review site. They all have their policies regarding reviews, and submit a claim to them, a dispute over that review, and tell them exactly why. Right? Tell them that it wasn't somebody who purchased your services. It was a former employee. And then also if they have anything in there that's false, make sure you raise that because that could be defamatory. Right? So that's very important. A lot of times that will actually work, and the review site will take it off, because if they're saying anything hateful, anything defamatory, or if they're not a customer, they're like a former employee, and you can show that, then the review site will take it off. That's one option. If you've tried that and it hasn't worked yet, by the way, it does take a couple of weeks, but if that doesn't work or didn't work, then you can send a letter to the employee, especially if they've said things that are defamatory, letting them know that defamation is against the law, and that you're asking them to take it down. And so that does work. Employees don't expect to receive that. If they don't take it down, at least they don't continue doing it. They don't post in other places, and they don't go to the dental board. They don't go to different locations. So those are the two ways. The third way, which is probably my favorite, but few people do it, is to respond directly to the person by especially if they're using sort of an anonymous name or a fake name, is to be very nice about things, but just say, look, we don't recognize you as a patient, so on and so forth. And there's different samples out there about that, but being really kind of upfront about it, but respectful, but also being firm that they're not a patient, and so on and so forth, so that when other people come on the review site, they kind of read their negative comments, and then they see your response. And people are smart enough to sometimes be able to put two and two together. So.
Well, thank you everyone for all the questions. I do apologize if we were unable to answer any of yours live, as we're out of time, but I truly appreciate the questions, and feel free to go to hrforhealth.com/Henry Schein, and I'm sure the HR for Health team and Ali will be happy to get back to you with any questions. Ali, I do want to thank you for your time. Great content as always. As a thank you to everyone for attending tonight, you will receive the recording of the webinar via email later this week. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you back here soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.